which is a holiday, the Jewish Arbor Day. The root of Arbor Day comes from this holiday of Tu B'Shvat. So I welcome you all, and I welcome everyone online as well in this live webcast, which is also archived afterwards. So it's both live and, I don't want to say not live, but live and archived. Okay. And it's always a pleasure to be here with you. Simon Jacobs is my name. And the topic will be, do you know how beautiful you are? Okay. With the subtitle being, Discovering Your Inner Seven Fruit, which of course is the theme of the holiday of Tu B'Shvat. Tonight and tomorrow. So we shall discuss that. Society today, in our daily lives, we hear mostly about how bad we are, negative things. In the media, you'll just compare the number of horror stories, murders, compared to the acts of nobility, and you'll see we are attracted perhaps maybe to the voyeurism of bad stuff, but there's a constant inundation of more negative stories than positive ones. And in our own personal lives, especially at work, and of course we wouldn't need that much therapy if we weren't getting messages all the time of how greedy we are, how selfish we are, how destructive, how bad. And then of course there are people invested in giving us these messages, especially insecure people. It's a way to stay in power or control. There are bosses who actually play their workers against each other. It's a way to keep people motivated. And it's a way for people to feel better about themselves when they're insecure, is to make other people feel bad. So misery loves company. So the list goes on for many, many reasons, and I don't have to go through all the reasons, that we get many, many negative messages about ourselves. And then when you study a bit of psychology, and you read a little Freud, and all the variations of Freud, as well as other thinkers, they tell us that human beings are essentially selfish creatures. Freud puts it, the id is a narcissistic beast within each of us that is the core essence of who you are. And yet there's an ego and a superego that you can subdue and somewhat tame the animal in order to coexist with others. So, and then when you add into the equation the Darwinian model of that we have evolved from lower species, all the way from apes and before that amphibians, and then prior to that bacteria, it does not help to respect yourself as a person who's capable of selfless acts. Beasts are not, we don't prosecute animals for being predators or for behaving aggressively or for killing wantonly, because that's their nature. It's part of the balance of nature. But when human beings behave like beasts, we consider it to be quite inferior. But if we've evolved from beasts, why shouldn't we be like beasts? So all this does not, as I said, contributes to the sense that we are not worth much, and that we are essentially more selfish and greedy and narcissistic than we are good and giving. Not to say that we cannot give, and not to say that we don't have acts of nobility, but predominantly we get the message of our negativity. So I'm here tonight for a refreshing new approach to tell you that you're beautiful. So we'll start with that. You are all beautiful, in my eyes at least. As we shall try to discuss also in your own eyes, once you're able to see yourself in a new way. And of course, how we project, that's how we affect others, how they look at us. Because remember, sometimes projection makes a big difference. When you're in a terrible mood, in a nasty mood, feeling really down or bad about yourself, you can imagine you probably project some energy that doesn't make you so attractive to others. When a person feels good about themselves and they feel beautiful inside, they feel comfortable, it tends to have a contagious effect as well. Not automatic, but that's how it is. So the way we feel from within is usually how we project outward, and also it goes the other way around. How people look at us. If, as I said, we're constantly inundated with these messages of our own selfishness or greed or capacity to murder, like in this latest Tucson tragedy. So there's the articles that analyze that whether we all can, if we push to the edge, whether we all can become murderers. People are very intrigued by these things. I remember when The Silence of the Lambs came out, the movie, there was this big essay in the New York Times that one of the reasons that people are so intrigued by this Hannibal the Cannibal, the brilliant psychiatrist, cultured in every possible way, but one switch, it doesn't work. He happened to like eating human beings. It made us think to ourselves, you can be perfect and brilliant and everything cultured and refined, and yet let's just say one thing in your brain isn't working and suddenly you can do something that's absolutely horrendous, inconsistent with the rest of it. So there's something to be said about our ability to look negatively at ourselves and at others. And as I said, there are many reasons, social reasons, psychological reasons why we are invested in that. But tonight, and hopefully not just tonight, from here on, we could all go away that there's really another side to the story. And that we are truly beautiful creatures. And there's another side to us that is not animalistic and narcissistic, but is extremely refined and divine, as we shall discuss. So what better theme on Tu B'Shvat, which is the birthday, the new year of the trees and vegetation, what better message is to discuss how we ourselves are like a beautiful tree growing majestically in the field, which is actually a verse in the Torah, Ki Adam Eitz Hasada. The human being is like a tree in the field. And therefore, the fruits that a tree bears reflects the fruits that each of us, each tree, meaning each human being in the garden produces. And as we shall see, there are actually 7 fruits that your psyche, your soul contains, corresponding to the 7 emotions that you may be familiar with from the Omer book I've done, Counting of the Omer and other places. The Kabbalistic infrastructure of the human being is 7 attributes, 7 emotions. And we'll discuss all 7 of them this evening, hopefully, and how we can recognize within ourselves unbelievable beauty. Now, of course, the challenge is that number 1 is to recognize it, number 2 is to actualize it. But without recognizing it, it's hard to even focus or actualize it. So, on the other hand, just recognizing obviously is not enough. The key is to actualize it, how you actually can express that beauty in your real day-to-day life, even sometimes in an ugly world around us. And a world, as I said, that constantly inundates us with a message that the world is an uglier place. So, there's that other side, the beautiful side of things. Like that story they tell, the girl comes home from school, and as I mentioned, she asks her mother, so where do we come from? Where do we humans originate from? So her mother tells her, we originate from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. We have patriarchs, matriarchs, great people in history. And then she asked her father the same question, and he says, we originate from apes, which originate from lower species, all the way back to bacteria, back to some bag of gas somewhere. And where that gas originates from, no one really knows, but we know everything after that. So she asks her mother, how do you reconcile this? You told me we originate from all these great people. And Dad says that we originate from these lower species. She says it's very simple. He's talking about his side of the family, and I'm talking about my side of the family. So maybe we do have 2 ancestors, and we have these 2 the 2 voices within us, and one is called the Nefesh Habamit in Hebrew, the animal soul, and one is called the Nefesh Elokid, the divine soul. One is actually called animal soul, Behemoth Nefesh Habamit. As I said, why are we insulting an animal by calling our soul an animal soul? We're not, because for an animal to behave like an animal, that's actually considered divine. That's exactly how they should behave. It's when a human behaves like an animal, that's the problem. Right, okay. And we don't need animals behaving like humans either. You know that another one of those fascinating horror films, The Island of Dr. Moreau, right? Where he experiments in the transformation of humans and animals and so on. You know, all the grotesqueness of that. So the boundaries are quite fine the way God made them. The challenge is, of course, to stick to your boundaries and not to cross over to the other side. There's enough potential to be actualized as we are without having to tamper with more fundamentals. So let's talk about what a tree is like. Since a human being is compared to a tree, it's a beautiful Torah statement. That means that we can learn from a tree, and next time you see a tree, you can look at it as a model, as a mirror image of yourself, at least aspects of ourselves. Obviously we're not a tree, that's not what it says, we're like a tree. So based on the concept of Elam Kotan Zeh Adam, which means human being is a universe, a microcosm, we each have parts of the universe within us. And by studying the universe, we can discover parts of ourselves. It's one of the beautiful lessons we can take from nature. So besides the fact that nature is tranquil and calms us, in many ways it fascinates us. You know, when you see nature, its symmetry has a very powerful impact on us. You see it today, especially with the cameras and modern technology, how you can study details in nature that once were impossible to witness, how fascinating it is. But there's one further step. It's not just fascinating, it also reflects us. It's a mirror image of ourselves. So, Tu B'Shvat, New Year of the Trees. What is the three elements in a tree that really make a tree? You have the roots, and you have the trunk and the branches, and you have the fruit, the leaves, the fruit, if it's a fruit tree. So we too, for us to be healthy human beings, need to have these three elements. We all need to have solid roots that are deeply rooted in the ground. And roots, just as their name implies. Roots means that you're connected to that which comes before you. You know, what would a tree be like without roots? So two things. Firstly, it wouldn't have a source of nourishment. It's the roots that draw the water from the ground, and that's why roots grow in the direction of where there's water. So they're drawing water into the tree. And the second thing roots do is keep the tree firmly planted. So when a storm strikes, if there were no roots, this tree would have no foundation. The trunk would not always be enough. The roots have their impact that they create this type of solid ground. And if you ever see a tree, a serious tree, uprooted, the roots are not just small little roots. What we see up on the surface of the ground is just the tip of the iceberg. Roots are extremely elaborate. Some roots are even bigger than the tree itself and longer than the tree itself. An interesting side note is that when NASA first sent astronauts out into outer space, they sent them with different experiments, because this was the first time humans were in a space that defied gravity. So they sent them, one of the things they sent along with them were plants, because they wanted to see how would a plant grow in outer space. You see, a plant or a tree on Earth grows, the roots grow in the direction of where the water is. But what would happen in outer space where there is no water, and there's no gravity, and the roots would have, what sense of direction would they have? And the interesting, fascinating thing, and there's pictures of it, when those plants came back to Earth, they weren't plants. They were roots completely covering the entire plant. They were completely out of control because they had no idea where to go. So roots grew not just from the bottom of the plant, also from the top and from the sides, from all over the place. They were desperately seeking a center. They were seeking their nourishment. They were seeking some type of focal point. Whereas on Earth, of course, the tree is on the ground, and it's not just gravity, but the roots they know their place, and they follow along. So there are many lessons we can learn from that as well, about focus and a central focal point, etc. So roots, the first thing a human being needs is roots. Psychologically, what that is, that's begins in childhood, our parents. You know, every one of us was carried 9 months in our mother's womb. That develops roots. It's a connection. Whether we understand it or relate to it at the time is not relevant. The bottom line is a child develops a very deep bond with the mother that carries it. You eat what your mother eats. You're nourished by what your mother is nourished. She carries you. Here's not the place to go into all the benefits of that, but just think of it. For example, there's been scientific observation of otters. Otters, the fish, the otter, they're known especially for the first years, mother otters are always touching their babies. As they swim in the waters, they're always touching them. And the scientists think the reason for it is because it's a form of nurturing, giving the child the confidence, giving the new otter the confidence that we're always there for you. It's a way of love. It's like hugging. Now, we humans also do the same. Maybe not quite as much, but as we need to. Like that story they tell, the sad story they tell about that mother who was so busy that for her child. So in the day school, one of the women who was teaching saw the child was really very clingy and need of deep love. So she decided, she's going to sit down with the mother, heart to heart, speak as a woman to a woman, try to impress upon her the importance for her to show some more love to the child. So she saw from the love that the child was asking for, and they said clinging and needy, and at school that the child needs a lot more love at home. So she sat the mother down. She thought it would be difficult. Actually, the mother was very receptive and open, which impressed her a lot. Most mothers are defensive and say no, all that stuff. And she says to her, I think you should. I think your son, or was it a daughter, or whatever, needs more hugging and more love and more kisses and so on. She says, I know the psychiatrist said exactly the same thing. And I've been telling our maid to hug her more, but she simply doesn't get it. That was her response. So children need that, and it begins in the mother's womb even when you don't want it. You have it for 9 months. It's imposed upon each of us. And we're completely immersed in the embryonic waters of the womb, which itself is a very nurturing environment, being underwater in a way, while being sustained. And then, in the early stages of our lives, those roots continue to be nurtured in a healthy home, where a child is taken care of all the time. So if you think about it, it's a brilliant way of development of a human being, that before the tree grows into a big tree and reaches into the expanses of the sky, it's developing its roots. And just like roots need sustenance and nourishment, so too, we get our sustenance and nourishment not from ourselves, but from someone else. So that is a healthy child that is planting firm roots. And of course, roots doesn't just mean the immediate father and mother, it also includes grandparents, and includes all the early influences that impress upon us. And you'll see anyone that has grown up in a healthy pathological the home, and we call the extended home, talks about the memories you have of your grandfather and grandmother and holidays and stuff like that. Obviously, is equally impressionable as the tragic antithesis, which is when it's lacking. And that means like the roots are lacking in that particular tree. But we're talking about the positive, so critical that a person have these roots. And this is really what's critical for us to be able to grow properly. So it's interesting, the roots are not just necessary for early stages. It's as these roots develop early on, that's what, when they firmly plant themselves into the ground and create the sources of nourishment, that's what, in direct proportion to that will be how powerful the tree will grow into a big tree. So from there we go to the second part, which is the tree itself, the tree trunk. And that's of course the being, who you are. The conscious self that you are, the one you're aware of, your body, your spirit, all of you, that's your tree. But this tree requires roots. And then there's the third component, which is the fruits that you will bear. The influence, the inspiration, the light that you will give off and emanate to others. So in essence, each of us has these three elements. You have the core self, who you are, that's the tree trunk. The branches. Branches mean all the different faculties, the different parts of ourselves. A human being. And think of a human being, arms and legs and so on, is like a tree and its branches. You could even see that actually we say the trunk of a human being is also called trunk. You could see the whole body and its branches. And we have the roots where we originate from that can sustain us. And then we have the fruits, which is what we give off. It's even literally the offspring that we will bring to this world. But offspring in Torah, Ela told us, fruit and offspring are not just actual children, it's also biological children. It includes psychological children. Our students are called our fruit, our offsprings. The Talmud says, Elu ma'pere mitzvahs. Torah also says that fruits are mitzvahs. Mitzvahs means our good deeds. So we also are not meant just to be trees that are self-contained. We're meant to give off. We're meant to bear fruit. And those fruit in turn will bear fruit, because the fruits can turn into seeds that in turn will give birth to the next tree. And the interesting thing is, a tree grows in two directions at once. It's the only thing that grows in two directions, the roots and upward. Of course, if it's a fruit tree, bearing the fruits. And that means, in a way, you can say, using here's an original poem coined by yours truly. Maybe it's not, but it's not so impressive as it sounds. Deep roots bear beautiful fruits. I haven't developed the rest of the poem yet. It's the opening line. But the bottom line is that, it's interestingly, the paradox is that the roots are so much beneath the ground and almost invisible. The fruits are all the way to the other extreme, but in direct proportion as the roots go deeper and sustain the tree, direct proportion to that will be the bearing of the fruits. The first sign that you know when fruits are drying up, or they're not growing, or branches are starting to dry up, you know that the roots are in trouble. You immediately know that the sustenance is not coming through. So, an interesting way, in a healthy environment, it's direct proportion to the security that your roots provide you that will allow you to really shine and be the best you can be as far as the fruits you give off. And that's also psychologically very obvious, that when you grow up in a nurturing and loving home, you build the confidence, the security of your nest that gives you the courage and the abandon and the self-confidence to fly and to bear fruit and to do whatever it takes to spread your wings. Where, God forbid, a person doesn't have those roots, or they're compromised, it will also compromise how confident you are and how many risks you'll take and how secure you are in really spreading out. So that's, in essence, how a tree reflects the being, each of us. And you could analyze a human being by looking at those three elements: roots, trunk, or roots, tree, fruits, and see where we stand. And a healthy human being needs all three, obviously. I didn't elaborate on the trunk and the tree itself because that's the obvious part. It's a part of who you are, but and it includes everything about you. So once we finish that initial introduction, so now we go into what type of fruits. What type of fruits? And here we go a little deeper. It's not just the fruits that you bear, as we shall see. The fruits are also fruits within you. Now, interesting thing is, not all trees are the same, but there are trees where the taste of the bark is similar to the taste of the fruit. There are trees that produce a fruit that is very similar to the tree itself, and there are trees that don't do that. But regardless, even the trees that don't bear exactly the same tasting fruit, I don't mean the bark is the fruit, it just has a similar taste, whether it's a sweet taste or it's a bitter one and so on. But regardless how you see it, remember, if a particular tree bears a certain fruit, let's say an apple tree, or for that matter a different type of tree, it's not an accident that this tree is giving off apples. This tree definitely has properties within it that are conducive or are the seeds that will lead to apples. So it's not just the fruits that come out of the tree, it's the tree itself that has so-called the fruit within it. So even when you see a sapling or just a seed, an apple seed, that apple seed, though it's not an apple any longer because it's a seed of an apple, it has within it the apple and everything that will allow the apple tree to grow. And when you plant that seed and you water it and and you're able to sustain its growth, will turn into a great apple tree one day bearing apples. So in a way, if we're able to bear fruit that help the next generation, offspring, or the fruit as in context of our influence on others, or teaching others, our students, or people we inspire, or in any way touch and influence, that fruit means there's a fruit within yourself that allows you to bear that fruit. So on Tu B'Shvat, it's not just the Rosh Hashanah, the new year of the trees, it's also, we specifically honor it for particularly 7 types of trees, or seven types of fruit. To be more specific, it's really not 7 fruit. In the broad sense, it's fruit, but when we say fruit, everything is a fruit. It's really 2 grains and 5 fruits. And they are, as the Torah tells it us in the chapter in Deuteronomy, it talks about the promised land, Israel, which in Israel says that Israel's blessing, or Israel, is exemplified by what kind of land is it? So God calls it a land that has much beauty to it, but but specifically Eretz Chita Osaera, a land of wheat and barley. The Geffen, which literally means a grape. Geffen also is the name for wine. That's why we say Beir Pri HaGofen on Kiddush, on wine. So there we go. Chita Seira, wheat and barley. The Geffen V'Se'ena, which is wine or grape wine. The grape. V'Se'ena is the fig. The Rimoin, the pomegranate. And then that's what we have there four. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 1 second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm sorry. And then finally the verse concludes, Eretz Zayis Shemen Udvash, a land of olive oil or olive, Udvash, which is literally means honey, but here it's referring to date honey, so dates. So the verse goes, a land of wheat and barley, grape, fig, pomegranate, a land of olives and dates.
Where is that exactly?
That's going to cost $10,000. No, I can't resist. It was a joke. Okay. It's Deuteronomy. Devarim, Deuteronomy. You know the joke? I'll tell you the joke in a moment. Make that 100,000. Deuteronomy 8. 8. The joke is that it's a Woody Allen joke, making fun of Judaism, religion. So a guy comes to a rabbi asking him, he says, I hear that you have the secret of the truth in the Torah. He says, absolutely. Is it the truth of all reality, all existence, all human beings? Absolutely. Can you teach it to me? Sure. How much will it cost? It's free. God gave the Torah at Sinai, didn't charge for it. Moses didn't charge for it. All the sages since then have never charged for it. So how could I charge? He's so impressed. Not only is he going to get the truth, the ultimate truth, God's truth, but also it's free. What do you get for free today? And they sit down and they open up a chumash. It's all in Hebrew. She says to the rabbi, it's all Hebrew. She says, well, Hebrew lessons will be $10,000. That's what I was alluding to. So it was a joke, and I didn't. Okay, you get the idea. So, yes, this is the in the chapter called Akev. So, now why do we talk about these 7 fruits? There are other fruits in the world. There are many, many other fruits. There are hundreds, thousands and thousands of species, and within species, subspecies, etc., etc. The reason is because generally, when we talk about the promised land, Israel, Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Chayfetz it's called, land of desire or the land of promise, Israel in a spiritual sense is like the center, and therefore everything that happens in Israel is amplified. In a way it's like the nucleus of everything else in the world. So though there are many, many fruits, and we all have those fruits within us as well, as I said, we are a microcosm of the universe, but in a general sense, these 7 reflect, since they are the special fruits of Israel, specifically these 7, they reflect the 7 particular attributes, the beautiful qualities within us. So I'm going to go through each of the 7, but with a small introduction beforehand, besides the discussion about the tree and the roots and the fruit, which is going back to what I said earlier about the 2 sides of your family tree, so to speak. Animal soul and the divine soul. The debate or the discussion among psychologists and thinkers throughout history has been, as I said earlier, whether a human being is fundamentally a good person or fundamentally a selfish person. Now, obviously, you could say we have both voices, as that's clearly true, but within the 2 voices we have, which one is the stronger one, the dominant one? So when you take the Freudian, I like to call it, coining it, the Freudian Darwinian model, there, clearly, the focus on the dominant gene or the dominant force in a person's life is selfish. And it's based on, even Richard Dawkins, the famous evolutionist and atheist, even has a book called The Selfish Gene, making the case that a gene, any gene, human gene, animal gene, every gene in the world, the universe, including plant, mineral, and vegetable, plant and animal, of course, and human, are selfish. Selfish means all it's interested is self-preservation, perpetuating itself, taking care of itself, and so on. Now that is very that statement is very resonant, because you think about yourself, you say, that's true. When I wake up in the morning, I don't think about other people, I think about me. my needs. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need this, I need that. Yes, when you're an intelligent person and you have somewhat refined character, you realize that it's not all about you. You realize there are other people in the world. And therefore there's a certain give and take. And if you're especially refined, you also love other people, and you can also self-sacrifice, give of yourself, a sacrifice of yourself. But even in this model, even the model, Darwinian Freudian model, doesn't say human beings can't sacrifice. And we see acts of nobility. Darwin and Freud and others could not deny that. So they go through different lengths of trying to explain how the selfish gene can reconcile with sacrifice, with giving your life to someone else, allowing yourself to be uncomfortable with the benefit of someone else. It seems to go counter to the selfish gene. Now, real evolutionists argue that that's also selfish. The selfish gene realizes for it to thrive, it needs others. Is there something about growing up in a community, in a group? The group helps you survive. So therefore, in a sense, you give to the group. Basically, they render everything into selfishness. Even the greatest acts of selflessness become also an act of selfishness. That's more radical evolutionary thinking. Everything is explained in the context of the selfish gene, of the survival of the fittest, everything. Now, whether you like that model or not, it's very prevalent today. It is the common model. You open up any a newspaper, every week, the Science Times, another article, you'll see it always comes down to it. Everything comes down to it. Why do you sneeze? Because the selfish gene discovered a way of protecting yourself. Why are you kind? Why are you this? Why are you that? Everything is explained with this evolutionary model. In many ways, it's very eloquent, because it all goes down to one root for everything, which is selfishness. Now, this selfishness is not necessarily always depicted as negative. It's depicted as survival. If this gene did not fight for its survival, who would? But in essence, it really means there's a fundamental rat race between all of us for resources. And we will give because we get in return something. But there's no concept of absolute selflessness unless you gain something in return. And if there is, I've even seen articles written by some evolutionists, they call that an anomaly, it's a quirk. It shouldn't have happened, it's a mistake of nature. When you see true selflessness and you can't find a benefit. Some argue that with enough research you'll find a selfish benefit there too. So that's one model. I am definitely describing it in an extreme, maybe. Not everyone goes that extreme. But that is a very common model, what I just described. It's not something I'm fabricating. You can look it up. I'm not setting up the so-called the case here. Then there's another model. That goodness and giving and nobility is the natural state of the human being. And it's the selfishness that's an anomaly. And it's the selfishness that's not as natural. This is the Torah model. And where do you see it? Very clearly. The Torah says a human being was created in the divine image. It's the first statement made about a human being. Tzelem Elokim, Zocher Nekeva Bara, male and female, in the divine image. God then separated the male and female, and they searched for each other to reconnect in love, and become one flesh, and build a family, and so on. So Tzelem Elokim. When's the first place we find out that a human being has another side? In the next chapter, in Noach, it says, Ki Yetzer Leva Adam Ramenu Urav. And that's where the root of the word Yetzer Hara comes from. Yetzer Hara means the evil inclination. Yetzer means its side. And we have two Yetzers. We have two sides. We have the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. The right side and the left side of the heart. So you have, like we say in the Shema, we say, B'shnei Yetzer, we say, B'chol Vavcha, B'chol Nafshcha, B'chol Moedech, B'chol Nafshcha, what did I say? B'chol Levavcha, we say. Why Levavcha with two bases? It says, it should have said B'chol Libcha. You should love God, B'chol Levavcha, B'chol Nafshcha, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. But we're focusing on B'chol Levavcha. Why does it say Levavcha? It should have said Libcha. You only have one heart. You don't have two hearts. Levavcha, with two bases, implies two hearts. So the Talmud says, B'shnei Yitzarecha, with both sides of the heart. Referring to the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, that you should serve God and love God with both sides of your heart. With both sides. But where do we get that a concept of two sides? We get it in the chapter Noach. After there's a whole chapter that talks about how human beings are created in the divine image, obviously, we also know from the Torah that human being, Adam and Eve, sinned and ate from the tree of knowledge. Later, those sins just multiplied all the way leading to the flood. And after the flood, that's when God says that the Yetzer Levad, there's another side to a human being that allows them to sin, allows them to transgress and digress. And that's called Yisro Adam Raminor, which means that the side of the heart of a human being is evil from childhood. But the first description is not eliminated because we say that we have an evil side. So who's the real person? You're the Tzelem Elokim. That's why it says in the Mishnah, in the Avot, in the Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, so it says, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem. How beloved is the human being that was created B'Tzelem, created in the divine image. And it talks about all human beings, Jew and non-Jew. He goes on to speak about the Jew afterwards, but Chaviv Adam. So you see from that Mishnah, in the Bible itself, you could argue, you know what? Maybe a human being was created in the divine image, but once they sin, there's no longer the divine image gets concealed or completely obliterated, God forbid. And now, who's in control? The id, in Freud's words. But once the Mishnah says, Chaviv Adam Shenivra B'Tzelem, the Mishnah was not speaking today, not just speaking before the tree of knowledge. It's speaking that today we say every human being is Chaviv, is precious. Why are you precious? Because you're created in the divine image. It means the divine image did not disappear. The fact that there is also evil, okay, there's another side, another voice. But when you do evil, it does not mean that your Tzelem Elokim disappears. It could go in hiding, it's concealed, but it's always accessible. This is a critical point because there are obviously theologies, you can name some, but Christianity in a way is based on this, of original sin, that once there was a sin, the Tzelem Elokim, the divine image, is no longer accessible. Which is why you need to believe in a certain Jew who has the Tzelem Elokim accessible in order to find your own. It's interesting. Well, obviously Jews do not believe that. We do not need intermediaries. Why the Christian Gentile world decided that they have to choose Jews to find that Tzelem, well, one Jew to find the Tzelem Elokim is their business. But based on the same logic, the Tzelem Elokim always remains intact, the divine image. The only question is, can you access it? Are you accessing it? You could access it. Are you accessing it? So we have a battle going on. So nothing new. We have a battle. So just to relieve, in case any of you are anxious by the fact that you have two voices, no, everybody on earth has two voices. And more importantly, God made it that way. So if that can relieve some of your anxiety, in case you sometimes have a temptation or an evil inclination, just know that's how you were created. That doesn't, however, mean it justifies that you should act on it. Just know the fact that you have it. The fact that at one moment you could be deeply inspired and feel connected and feel godly and want to do a mitzvah and so on, and a moment later or a day later you have another voice, that's exactly the way it was meant to be. The challenge is obviously to curb and tame the animal's voice, and follow the divine image, the divine voice, and in some way, as I said before, find a way to love God with both voices and both sides, which we shall soon discuss in the context of wheat and barley. But the point here in this introduction is, to sum up, is that fundamentally we are a garden, a tree inside of a beautiful garden, as it was planted in the Garden of Eden, and we have within us beautiful fruit. And no matter what happens in your life, no matter how you may have wandered away from your calling, or how sometimes you think you may be ugly, or have done ugly things, your fruits have never disappeared. They're always there waiting, impatiently actually, pining, waiting to be freed and be released. So when I said at the beginning that each of you is beautiful, it's not just beauty, you actually have 7 dimensions of this beauty, and it behooves you. Great, unbelievable message that you should discover what they are. Once you discover what they are, obviously the next step is to do something about it and let it shine forth, let it bear fruit, not just remain hidden inside the tree. So here are the 7 different types of beauty that each of us has. The 7 beginning with, and you'll see they're like in groups of 2. The first 2 are the grain ones, the grains. It's wheat and barley. Wheat and barley, even though, as I said, it's not what we call a fruit, but it is fruit of the grain. Is fruit of the stalk is grain. So it is something that grows, obviously. But the difference between these 2 and the next 5, as we'll see, is the 2 are the 2 fundamental basics in life. The other 5 associate more with something pleasurable. So basically, especially in the Torah, when we talk about bread, not on bread alone does man live, use the word bread. Bread is usually a term used for general food, general sustenance. So we talk about the 2 grains, even though there are other grains, there are 5 grains total. There's oats and so on, spelt, and what's the 5th? Anyway, but generally speaking, the ones that we have most connection with is wheat and barley. The difference between wheat and barley, the Talmud says, wheat is the food of man, and barley is the food of animals. Most animal food, I mean animals as in domestic animals, like that are not animal-eating animals. What are that called? What are non-animal-eating animals called? Herbivores. Yeah, right. Herbivores they eat barley. Like for example, horses, or cows, or I don't know about goats and sheep, but so the Talmud says that Ma'achal behema barley, which is chita, sa'ira rather, is animal food, and chita is human food. In other words, most of the grain, even though we can eat barley and we have barley-based foods, but grain, the main grain of humans is wheat. So, in essence, these 2 types of food, just as an aside, maybe not completely as an aside, this is one of the reasons that the Omer Se'irim, the Omer, when we count the Omer, during the 49 days between Passover and Shavuos, we're counting down to the offering of the Omer. We're counting from the time when the Omer Se'irim, when a certain measure of barley was brought. So it says in the holy books, it says that's the reason that these 49 days are the days of refining the animal soul, because Se'irim, barley, reflects the animal part of us. So these 2 grains reflect 2 sides of a human being. 2 sides I mentioned before. One is the divine soul, the man, the human within you. The other is the animal within you. And the interesting thing is both need to be sustained. Both need to be sustained. And here comes something extremely powerful. You really will hear this in any mystical school of thought. You would think that the beauty within us is the divine soul, as I said, the divine image. Or the human in this case, the grain, the wheat. Whereas the animal soul is something that is selfish, driven for self-preservation, and you'd think it has to be eliminated. No. Torah says that both are beautiful, and both are 2 elements inside of you. So how do we explain that? How do we explain these 2 sides? As I said, the first side is clear. All acts of nobility and selflessness, and when you ask questions like, why am I here? Or how am I, what is the mission of my life? To serve. Those are questions that come from the divine soul. What are the questions that come from the animal soul? How do I survive? How do I gain power? How do I gain food? How do I gain money? How do I climb the ladder? So they're antithetical, 2 different voices inside of us. One is the transcendent voice, that's the wheat, the human divine soul, and the other is the selfish one. So the question is, what beauty can you find within the selfish one? So maybe different ways to explain it. Let me use an example. Are there any Trekkies here? You know what a Trekkie is? Oh, 1. Okay. More than 1? No one else? Do anybody know what a Trekkie is? Yeah. So there's a group called Trekkies. There was the Grateful Dead, so they're Deadheads. And there's Trekkies. And there's other so-called cults. Some are called sports fans, Jets fans, other fans. Some people are fans of the underdog fans, whoever's everyone's rooting against. Fan is short for fanatic. I always like to point out, but you never hear anyone say religious fan and sports fanatic. Just for the record. So we all have our obsessions. So Star Trek, with this television show that was created and produced and aired in the mid-60s, like 66, 67, 68. At the time, actually, it was successful, but it wasn't as it would become later. It's like this hour show about basically the futuristic show about conquering outer space, where no man has gone before, right? To boldly go where no man has gone before. And it had these interesting themes about other worlds and aliens, and a lot of issues, actually philosophical issues. Who's the founder? Gene Roddenberry. Was he Jewish? can't be. I'm just kidding. Okay, fine. Roddenberry. Good. Spock was, so was Kirk. Anyway, so this was the show, and as then after the few seasons that it aired, I guess it started replaying and so on, right? The reruns. Then it caught on a whole cult following. It became known as Trekkies, right? When did you join? You're a lifetime member? Okay, a lifetime member. Good. And it has these interesting themes. It's, it's like anything. It has its following. There's Seinfeld Trekkies too. I mean, whatever they're called, Seinfeldians. You can't miss a show and so on and so forth. Then they made movies out of them. Major films, right, etc. The real original Trekkies say the films are not as good as the original series, right? There you go. I'm not a Trekkie, but I'm familiar with what's going on a little. Modern culture, let's put it this way. So there's one show that I do remember seeing, where this is, as I said, this needs a little flight of imagination because it's about the future. There's space transport and time transport and going back in time. A lot of ideas that have not yet become reality. But one of them is that they come to some planet and some machine or some ion zone causes a split between the good and bad side of a human being. In this case, Captain Kirk. Okay, and he goes through it, and he actually splits into two human beings. You see his good side, and you see his bad side, and they encounter each other. One is this vicious, driven, ambitious, angry one, and the other one is this gentle soul, purely good, rational, patient, sublime, and so on. And the show is interesting because it really shows. It's almost like a Dr. and Jekyll, Mr. Hyde idea. Are you familiar with that? Any Jekyll and Hydeans here? We talk about cults. Robert Louis Stevenson wrote a classic book about a Dr. Jekyll who experimented with drugs and chemicals, and to discover a way to separate between the evil and the good of a person, or to turn the dominant evil, the what's called the dormant evil into dominant evil. There's that story. I mean, it's fascinating because we all have these two voices, and interestingly, they all go back. The roots are biblical. As I said, the Bible says clearly that there's these two voices. However, in all instances, they're all bundled together in one person. So, of course, it always intrigues every one of us to figure out how would we look like if we only had one without the other. And would you have a conscience if you're only evil, so to speak? Here the conscience keeps you from doing the worst possible things. There's yet another book. Since we're already covering the gamut here, another book by another great writer. Some people are fans of his. Oscar Wilde wrote The Portrait of Dorian Gray, right? Where there you have Dorian Gray, this handsome young dude, who decides to make a deal with the devil. The devil says, I'll let you always remain young, without Botox, without any other tricks of the trade, and always remain young, but there will be a portrait in your cellar, in your attic, whatever, in your attic, that will actually transform, that will change. The portrait will change as you grow. So this guy, of course, now that he has eternal youth and the fountain of youth, immortality, begins to go on rampages, no guilt, knowing there won't be consequences. He's not dying, not going anywhere. He will not be judged. Meanwhile, his portrait, the more evil and the more selfish and the more grotesque he becomes, the portrait becomes grotesque. But he remains as handsome, beautiful face, attractive to everyone. Finally, curiosity, of course, everybody wants to know what's going on. So he goes up to the attic, and he. Should I spoil the ending for those who haven't read it? Yeah, why not? It's all right. I'll save you the time reading it. It's a motion picture too. I don't want to be accused of anything here, but fine. So he goes up to the attic, he sees this portrait, and it is so ugly and grotesque, and he knows that's him. That's what he would look like. So he takes a knife and begins to cut it up. And of course, once he does that, the reverse happens. The portrait becomes what he looked like when he was young, when it was made, the portrait, and his real face becomes that. Then he dies, etc. I mean, obviously, it's symbolic of the idea of a person trying to know how would you live if there were no consequences. No one would ever find out. Your face would never change, and all that. So all these are basically exercises of trying to understand this type of separating good and evil within a person. So in the Kirk scene, I don't remember it all, but what I recall that stood out was that they ultimately obviously realized they need each other. But it's the wise, the good Kirk that has to convince the other one is extremely aggressive. And the interesting thing, some type of crisis happens in outer space. And the good Kirk, being separate now from his evil counterpart, is indecisive. He doesn't have the drive, because he's so good that when it comes to crisis, he doesn't have that instinct of survival to do anything. Whereas the other one has that survival but doesn't have any rationale. He's just completely selfish and all he's interested is in women and whatever comes his way. So, which is an interesting point, which I would definitely say reflects somewhat the strengths that we have that so-called our animal soul has that our divine soul does not have. And that's why it also has a beauty to it. Obviously, if it's not channeled, the animal soul can behave in the most selfish and ugly and destructive ways. But there's also a power to it. The idea, for example, to sense when there's danger. The idea to know to fight for self-preservation or the preservation of those that you love. The divine soul, in a way, is too good for this world. Too pure. It won't know how to deal with a crisis. It won't necessarily know how to deal with evil, for that matter. So there's a strength to be stated for the animal soul if, and this is the big if, it has to be harnessed and obviously combined with the barley with the grain. So these two first fruits are essentially the two fundamental voices inside each of us. The good and you call the evil side. But it's not evil as in that's an evil part of you. It's a part of you that could be evil because it's driven by self. But not everything about the self is bad. The self is what keeps us driven. It also, if a person was completely humble and to the point where they completely self-nullify, you won't be unique. That part of you also recognizes what makes you unique, what makes you different. The key is that that difference and that uniqueness should not become completely self-contained and narcissistic. But if you think of a balanced approach, then you really have two voices inside of you. You have the divine part that is teaching you how to find transcendence, how to be refined. And that part also teaches the animal part how to harness the animal within us. The drive, the ambition, the need to survive, which are all positive, healthy things, but they are being directed and harnessed by the divine part. So think of it like the divine being the captain of the ship, and the animal is the ship itself, the horsepower. No pun intended. The horsepower that gives you energy, that drives you. Rav tvus b'koyach sher. There's no question that a human being trying to plow a field on his own can never plow a field as powerfully as an animal can. So we created the plow. What is the plow? They attach a plow to an animal. Today to garbage trucks that plow snow, hopefully. and the animal or the truck or whatever the vehicle is able to have so much more horsepower, so much more power to be able to plow the fields. So to sublimate and tame an aggressive world like ours, we need an animal within us. Which interestingly, if you think about it as the two voices within us, is also the twin brothers, Jacob and Esau. Twin brothers, two alter egos, both grow up and both are part of the pregnancy of Rebecca, and Zelu Umazeh, meaning that they both are two voices. But at the end of the day, they are both brothers, and they're both children of Isaac and Rebecca. The problem becomes, and one is Ish Milchama, is a warrior, that's Esau, and one is Ishtam Yeshiv Aholim, is the scholar, the pure one. The goal here is not just to be like Jacob, the goal is also to harness both of them, which is the whole story about the blessings, why Isaac wanted to give the blessings to Esau, because Esau has a lot of power. The power, however, of a warrior on its own can be very destructive. So the end of days, and I'm being very brief here, I've discussed this at length in the chapter of Vayishlach and Toldos. At the end of days it says, V'hayshel Hashem Amlucha, when it says that Esau tells Jacob, why don't you come with me and your family, and once they reconcile and make peace. So Jacob says to Esau, Visnala li'iti, the children are young, the sheep are tender. We'll go slowly, you go ahead and we'll ultimately come to you. So Rashi asks, why is he lying? He knows he wasn't going to live near Esau, he was afraid to do that. So Rashi says, no, he's talking about when Mashiach comes, V'hayshel Hashem Amlucha, when Mashiach comes, the end of days, there will be harmony and peace between the two. So he did mean that he would one day come, but we were not ready yet. So the bottom line is the ultimate goal is not for a person to annihilate the sense of self or to annihilate the animal soul. It's to nourish it. And that too has beauty in it. I'll give you just one example, because I want to make sure I cover all the 7. But one example, I mentioned it many times here. Addictive personalities are usually the most powerful souls of all, the most creative souls. You see people get addicted to things, whether it's drugs, and I'm talking about negative addictions, unhealthy, destructive ones. Think about it for a moment. Why would someone want to get addicted? Nobody wants to get addicted to anything. It goes against the grain of human dignity to want to be dependent on some substance. Who would want to be dependent on, whether it's a drink, alcohol, or drugs, or sex, or gambling, or whatever it is, or food, or whatever it is that we become dependent on? So it's not that if someone's looking to become an addict. That's only a side effect of a hungry soul that's looking to feed itself. It's looking for a high. And when you're in a desert and you're thirsty and desperate for a drink, you're going to drink anything that comes your way. And if it's poison, it's poison. And if it's destructive, it's destructive. If it's addictive, the more hungry you are, the more addictive you will become. So let me just clarify. I'm not suggesting addiction per se is a good thing. Obviously not. But a mediocre person is going to be less addicted to things because there's nothing, they're not desperate. They're not looking to, they're not desperate for anything. So when you talk about addictive personality, and I deal with this unfortunately, the key is how do you really get somebody off something, is obviously that once they're addicted to something, it's hard to just wean them off of it because there's psychological and physical dependency. But a critical element, especially long-term rehabilitation, is to find an alternative. If you don't find an alternative, even if you get somebody off a drug or alcohol, they'll go back to it because, well, they could easily go back to it because they don't have an alternative. You cannot leave a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. And a human being that's hungry or thirsty, if you don't give them good, healthy food or drink, they're going to find unhealthy food or drink. And the same thing is psychologically and emotionally. So all the things that, all our vices, all of us, whatever it may be, is filling a void. That void per se is not a bad thing at all. It's a healthy thing. So the fact that the animal soul is searching for something and sometimes acts in a very animal way, that doesn't mean that the drive and desire and passion and lust that the animal has is bad. The question is, can you find that healthy outlet where that passion and desire can be directed? That's the key thing. Which also makes it a lot easier to deal with when you think of it that way, because it's not like depriving someone. It's one thing you tell someone, listen, you got stuck with this addiction, too bad. You must deprive yourself of it. The answer should be you're depriving yourself of this particular outlet, which is poisonous for you. But you can find an alternative which will give you the equal and an even greater high, but in a healthy way. That's very intriguing, because someone says, really, I can get the same result? Well, not exactly the same result, because it's not about numbing yourself and not about self-medicating and so on, but the same result as the positive side, whatever it is that you're looking for. So you see that the animal soul can be harnessed and turned into unbelievable power. And that is also a beautiful part. And it's interesting, I once said this actually to a guy that had almost died from OD'd, and it was a really bad scene. He had to go into rehab, they had to literally pump out drugs from him and all that. And finally, he came out of it and wanted to really do something about it. But he knew it was going to be an uphill battle. So I was called in. He knew me, not directly, but indirectly. I was part, I cannot say, I'm not taking the full credit here, but I was part of helping him get back on his feet. And now he's an unbelievable guy. He helps. I suggested to him that he should go into work helping others, because he can acutely understand others that were in his situation. And he's passionate. He's unbelievable human being, because he's taken all that and turned it into helping others. And so, he has his challenges. It's not like every day is the best day, but he's off the drugs, obviously. That's a given. But what he's done is he didn't just go back to a life, deprived. He's actually taken all that energy and wisdom and turned it into something he's helping a lot of people. So it's a perfect example. When I saw him, and I remember looking at him, he had these hollow eyes. He looked like everybody had given up on him. His family didn't want to see him anymore because they had stolen money, all the stuff that happens. And when I spoke to him the first time, I saw he was a really sensitive soul. And I told him. He started crying. He says, that's not true. Come on, you're just saying it to make me feel good. I said, no, why would I say it? I really think you have a lot of sensitivity, I could tell, but it's completely, been hijacked by all these things. There was a lot of conversations, but I remember, and he reminds me, he uses that. He says that, the key is to find the beauty even in the evil, even in the ugliness. Not to justify it, God forbid, Not to in any way give excuses, but to find that kernel, that spark of like the fruit within it. There is a fruit in there somewhere. Like that optimistic country boy comes to a barn filled with manure till the ceiling. And he says, well, there must be a pony in here somewhere, So even in complete darkness, there must be a pony in there somewhere. Again, it should not be confused with trying to in any way minimize the problems. The key is to know how to throw out the peels and extract the fruit. So those are the two first elements. I said I could elaborate a lot more, but you're all wise, so you'll take this and you can develop it further. So we go over now to the next 5. Now here we're talking already about the so-called the pleasure or pleasurable fruits. Bread is considered to be, or grain considered to be, necessary for sustenance. The others are not necessary for sustenance. The grape, the fig, the pomegranate, the olive, and the date. But they do sustain us, but they also have an element of a personality. Grain is basically tasteless. You could spice up and salt for bread or grain, but by itself it's tasteless. It's essentially necessary for sustenance, but it's tasteless. It's basically the raw elements of the divine soul and the animal soul, as I spoke, wheat and barley. The others already have personality. So the first one is geffen. What does geffen do? What does a grape do? What does wine do? And of course I'm not talking about wine in any excess, as I just obviously emphasized. So nichnas yayin yotze soid. When a person drinks wine, the expression is the wine goes in and the secret comes out. They say in Yiddish, bashikr, a drunk, which is not what we're talking about. Was is auf lung is auf zung. Whatever is on his lung is on his tongue, which means he talks too much, basically. He shares all the secrets. Obviously, a person who says l'chaim in a healthy way, in a balanced way, it may open up secrets, but the secrets will be healthy ones, not just talking and blabbing. So the idea of geffen also, it creates joy. What is joy? Think about it. What is the difference when you do the same thing with joy or without joy? If you do something without joy, you could be doing it all correctly, going through every motion, but it doesn't have that spirit and the looseness and the freedom that when you do something with joy. You ever been to a party? Let's say you hosted a party, but you were not in the mood, but you have no choice. You're going through the motions. It's not the same way than when you welcome people and guests when you yourself are joyous. And the same thing is throughout. Joy does not necessarily change the activity, but it changes it from a dead one to a live one. So geffen is basically a fruit within each of us, that each of us has potential that we're not aware of. Just like the grape has potential of wine, and just like the wine carries a secret within, we have great potentials within us. And we have joy locked into that potential. So when people say, how could the Torah tell us a commandment, be joyous? Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. We say, that this happens to you because you do not serve God with joy. How could you demand somebody to serve with joy? Joy is an emotion. Either you're in the mood of it, you're not in the mood. It's one thing you can tell somebody, put on tefillin, eat kosher, light a candle, Shabbos candle. So even if you're not in the mood, it's an action. But how can you tell somebody, be joyous? So the same similar question that's asked, the Maggid of Mezrich asked the question about love. How could there be a commandment to love God or love another? Either you love or you don't love. You could command someone to be charitable even if you don't feel any love. Be kind, giving. But that's an act. How could you demand love, Ava? And his answer is that the commandment is to think about, to meditate, mizbeinen, on things that bring love. When you think about somebody and their qualities, it can awaken love. Like I mentioned, this guy, he was not very lovable when he was lying there almost dead. And as I said, everybody turned away. But if you look closely and you start looking deeper inside a person's soul, you say, this person has a lot of things to be loved. Now he needs a lot of work to let it come through. People who have love in their hearts know how to find love in others. Often when we don't love ourselves, obviously it's hard to find love within, something to love within another person. Even the Talmud talks about a guy that was walking down the street, a sage, and he saw a very uncomely person, a very ugly person. And he said to him, Kama muchur, look how ugly you are. A sage to say that is itself tells you something. But I guess he couldn't control himself. And the man answered to him, the ugly person answered to him, Lech le'uman shasani. Go to the craftsman, meaning God, who crafted me, who shaped me. And of course, this is an unbelievable lesson to him and to all of us. This was also created by God. The fact that you don't like what it looks like, doesn't make you comfortable. It's all about you. And do you think you don't have anything that's ugly if someone were to see you under a microscope? We still look, obviously, beauty is still a virtue. But we have to understand that everyone has their beauty within them. And I've talked about this here about special children, people who work with special children. You need to have, besides patience, you need to be able to see beauty in them if you really want to help them. Whether it's Down syndrome children or others who are challenged mentally or in other ways, or physically handicapped. Not everybody's made out to be able to work with people with kids like that, or for that matter, elderly people who are suffering from different illnesses. But the people that are able to do that, especially those that do it not just as a job, you see they're able to see beauty even there. And because they're able to see it, it extracts that beauty from inside that person. You see it all the time when you really look closely. Some of us may not have the capacity. I think everyone has the capacity. But there are real examples for this. So everyone has the grape within them. Everyone has that wine and that possibility. So the commandment to find joy is to think about things that bring joy. And then the joy that is trapped inside your grape, within your soul, emerges. So it's not a commandment, go find and switch on and start, pinch your cheeks and start jumping and dancing and out of joy. The commandment is, do things to awaken the joy that's inside of a soul. Look at children. Except in the rare occasions, for genetic reasons, or because their mothers were pregnancies, children are joyous creatures. They're all born with natural joy. They laugh, they're exuberant, they're excited about things until adults teach them not to be so happy. Or until they're hurt in life. Children are natural joy. So where does all the joy go that we were so natural to us? It goes undercover. It's the grape within you. So joy, revelation, expression, doing things, coming alive is all in the grape within us. Then come the next two, which, as you'll see, the next two and the next four that we're going to talk about are like groups of two. Te'ena v'rimain. The fig and the pomegranate. Now, firstly, you look physically, the difference between a fig and a pomegranate, you see the seeds are quite different. The seeds in a fig are very small, and they're all over the place, and they're very close to each other. In a pomegranate, it's full of seeds too, but they're hard, and each of them have their own little shell. So it's an interesting contrast between these two. Another difference between the two is a fig is generally sweeter, and pomegranate is a little more sour. I think there are sweet pomegranates, but relatively it's more of a sour drink or sour fruit. Now the Talmud uses an expression that Rishoyim, which is wicked people, Maleim mitzvahs kerimain, are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate. So there are the cynics that there are different ways of interpreting it, and some say interpret it this way. The more aggressive Jews interpret it like this: that even if someone's filled with mitzvahs, they're still, like a pomegranate, they're still Rishayim, they're still wicked. But the more natural interpretation of the Talmud is the other way. That even somebody that is wicked on many levels is filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate. Now the question is, why a pomegranate? There are seeds in many fruits. So it's true a pomegranate has many seeds. Some say that a natural pomegranate has 613 seeds corresponding to the mitzvahs. But there's more to it. A pomegranate, and what's the connection to the wicked person? The pomegranate has seeds, but the seeds are separate from one another. Which means that we can have good deeds, a mitzvahs within us, but they're not internalized, they're not integrated. So it's good deeds, but they're separate from us. Like the seeds in a pomegranate, each one has its own shell. Whereas in a tzaddik, in a righteous person, the mitzvahs are integrated. They're all together like in a fig. So the difference between these two, in a way, is the difference between a type of compartmentalization, which is the pomegranate, and an integration, which is the fig. And so it's the difference why one is sweeter and one is more sour. So what does it mean in the fruit within us? There are things in our lives that we need in our own inner beauty where things should be integrated. Find a connection, not fragmented. Find a connection to each other. But there's also a virtue for compartmentalizing, where seeds are separate from one another. When's compartmentalizing, for example, a virtue? Compartment is a virtue when, let's say, you go through a negative experience. You don't want to live with it the rest of your life. So you compartmentalize, you lock it away in a closet once you've grown through it and dealt with it. Also, we live in a material world where we are involved in many different activities, so compartmentalization has its virtue. At the same time, there's a side of us that needs to integrate and bring things together. It's interesting, the ta'ena, the fig, according to the one opinion, and the primary opinion, the tree of knowledge was a fig tree. Which is why it says afterwards, Adam and Eve covered themselves with leaves of alei ta'ena, the leaves of a fig tree. One of the explanations given why the tree of knowledge was a fig tree, because the tree of knowledge was knowledge of good and evil. It was an intimate connection, an integration with the good and evil. It was one thing if they only knew about it, but once they ate from it, it became part of them. So the fig represents a type of intimacy and integration. So as far as our personality goes, we have two strengths. We have time where we're able to find connections. For example, you meet new people. Some of us are afraid of new people, but there's a certain beauty to be able to be confident and comfortable. You meet new people, you learn new things, new conversations, new opportunities. It's a form of like being integrative. Some of us are very isolationist. We like to remain alone, like the pomegranate seeds. So there's a virtue, obviously, in being more extrovert, more out there, where you integrate things, you learn things, as opposed to being isolated or alone. That is the beauty of one side of within all of us. So even the most introverted person should know they have a fruit inside of them called the fig, which allows you to integrate, allows you to take in and experience many different things and constantly explore and learn new things. But there is a time where we need also to be isolated, to be alone. People who are total extroverts and constantly party animals don't have time to develop on their own. So there's a certain element of having a compartment where every seed in your life has its own little closet, its own compartment, and you focus more on your own internal self. Obviously, the goal is to balance the two. Einani mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? So we need to have a certain individuality that's separate from others, and not depend on others as a crutch. But then there's another side, imani la'atzmi, if I am for myself, ma'ani, what will I be? So we need to have integration. We need to have friends. It's the Rambam, Maimonides writes, Adam is medini. We are social creatures. We're social people. We need others for stimulation, for ideas, to bounce things off, obviously to love and be loved. And also in relationships, there's the fig dimension and there's the pomegranate dimension. In every good relationship, there's a need for closeness and communication, but there's also a need for space and boundaries. So the fig and the pomegranate represent these two beautiful features. When balanced, are very healthy. When unbalanced, obviously they can be, as anything, like I said, with the other fruit, can be destructive. And then comes another category, Eretz Zayis, Shemen and Dvash. And here too, you'll see what the fig is to the pomegranate, the same thing as what olive is to honey. Here too, olive is bitter. Honey is sweet. In this case, we're talking about the date, date, and we're talking about the olive. Another distinction between the two is that the olive is known for an olive represents the pressures of life, that it does not produce oil until you press it. You don't say the same thing about a date, even though there's date honey and you have to press it to get honey, but it's a whole different process. Olives are known, so the bitterness of the olive represents the pressures of life. And this too is a fruit and a beauty within us. The capacity for us to deal with pressure and the capacity to excel as a result of pressure. So we all have an olive within ourselves, just like we have the the wheat and the barley, and we have the grape, the fig, and the pomegranate. We have the olive. The olive within us is representative, as I said. It has a great potential, but that potential requires pressure. Now, most of us would not look at pressure as being positive. Who needs pressure? Who wants to be pressured? But you know something? It's a strength of the human spirit that has the ability to deal with pressure and even to welcome it. And I could speak for myself. I only excel when there's pressure, to be very honest. I hate it, but there's no choice. You come to discover that's the only time you excel. Deadlines, pressure, everything you don't like is what creates excellence, challenge. So while you're going through the pressure, it's really uncomfortable. But when you get experienced with it, you come to realize this is the way you excel. Now, obviously, we should only deal with pressures that are healthy, pressures that we bring upon ourselves instead of pressures that come from life that's sometimes not that. But the point is that each of us has that quality within us. So, you know, when a coach looks as an athlete, or you go to an army, and you have this type of drill sergeant that beats the out of you, kicks your butt. So at the time you don't like it, but a person, especially if they see the excellence inside of you, knows that you can deal with the pressure. That is a virtue, that's a beauty within us. And what it adds to all the others is that ability to excel. That's what the olive presents. And when you do produce the olive, it is only the olive that is able to illuminate. All the others cannot burn. Nothing produces oil. And that oil becomes the oil that you light the menorah with, we light a Hanukkah menorah with. The others do not produce something to fire. You cannot produce oil from anything else. I'm sure today with certain technologies you may be able to manipulate, but oil naturally is a fluid, is a flammable fluid. And then finally the honey, the date. The date is sweet, and the date is the exact opposite of the olive, in the sense that each of us has sweetness within us. Now, sometimes it's very hard to see, especially you meet certain bitter people who, you definitely know they have a lot of olive oil, but do they have the sweetness of honey? Can you call them honey? Let's put it that way. And sometimes you can't see it. There are people that naturally have a sweetness. You look at them, you talk to them, you can sense it and you can gravitate to it. But what the Torah tells us that everybody has sweetness within them, and even those that have some even those that are conscious of sweetness, means that you have even more deeper sweetness within you. So, what exactly is sweetness? Well, it's hard to really describe. A sweet person. What's a sweet person? A sweet person is obviously a pleasant person, but that's pleasant. That's not sweet. A sweet person gives off a certain. It's not a sensation, but it's a person that will be kind, will be giving. I don't even really know how to go further than that. How would you define a sweet person as opposed to a pleasant person? Sweet. There's a goodness, more than just goodness, there's a sweetness about them. I keep going back to sweetness. I'm sure I'll find some synonyms here. But, the thing is, we all know what it is, because when you meet someone that's sweet, you know that you don't need explanation. You don't need words, let's put it that way. So all of us have it. Like we have the other 6 fruits. The only problem is, as I said earlier, they're all submerged. They're all buried. They're like all either in the root level or on the tree level. They're somewhere within, and you can't access them, or you can't see them, let's put it that way. The challenge, and this is why Tu B'Shvat comes once a year, it tells us, you have this, honor it. When you eat the fruit tonight or tomorrow, remember it's really part of who you are. You have it within yourself. And the work we have cut out for us is to recognize it and somewhat act on it. So maybe a good exercise of Tu B'Shvat, it's my own idea I just came up with, is to actually demonstrate these seven features in our day tonight, as I said, tonight or tomorrow. Find somebody you meet, you don't have to do it in a way. Listen, bump into someone and say, "Listen, Tu B'Shvat tonight, so I have to be extra sweet. So tell me if I'm sweet." You could just do it. No one has to know that you are doing it a Tu B'Shvat type of thing. But it would be interesting. What would it look like if you faked it? And you may realize after a while that faking it actually reveals that you really have it. Sometimes, and that is also a Jewish method. They tell the story that there were these Misnagdim, these anti-Hasidim, who came to the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. And they came with, of course, with a slander and something negative to say. As I said at the outset of this class, there are always people who have something negative to say about things. I'm sure if you look at your Rolodexes, you can always find somebody that, if you're in a particularly good, sweet mood, will tell you why you should become sour or make you sour. There are always people good for that. Key is to have, of course, another list of people that every time you call them, make you smile and they make you feel better than after the conversation. So that's a good criteria for different types of friends. After a conversation with a certain person, do you feel better about yourself, more hopeful, or do you feel worse about yourself? And then maybe, without telling anybody, maybe you should use a little notation, like G or B, good for good or bad, near that person's name. I don't mean to put it that way, but make sure nobody ever finds this list, obviously. So maybe use some other code, like 1 or 2 or something like that. But there are people that guarantee. Of course, you could have a number 3 for someone. Sometimes they make you feel this way, sometimes that way, like your mother or father, for example. So anyway, these misnagdim came to the Rosh Zalman. They said, "Your Chassidim, they're fakers, they're hypocrites." I said, "Why? Why you say that?" They say, "Because they daven hours and hours during the day, and you think they're much more refined, and we see them afterwards. They're far from being better people. They just fake it. They make believe like they're these pious people, and they're davening, and they're praying, and they're shaking, and all that." The Alter Rebbe, as his custom was, he listened to them quietly, and he said, "You know what?" And they say he put his hand on his head, and he said, "May it be fulfilled in them the Mishnah." So of course they didn't know what Mishnah he's talking about. And with that he said goodbye to them. So they went to ask, of course, his students, what Mishnah what did he mean? They thought they were scholars. They should know which Mishnah he means. And he said like this, and I should add, he said, "May it be fulfilled in them the Mishnah, and meruba midah teva, the opposite. Should be fulfilled in them with the words of the Mishnah, and even more so in a good thing than the opposite in a bad thing." What was he referring to? So one of the students said, very simple. He right away knew what the Alter Rebbe meant. There's a Mishnah that says that if a wealthy person makes believe he's a pauper and goes begging, he'll end up becoming one. That's what the Mishnah says. So the Alter Rebbe was saying, may it be fulfilled in them. To let them make believe, here it's in a negative, by the wealthy person faking himself becoming a pauper. And the positive would be to make believe that you're a pauper who's trying to be wealthy, and God will bless you. You'll end up being like that. So instead, if you make believe that you're a bad person when you're really a good person, God forbid, that's the negative. But if you're a person who's not so pious and you make believe you're pious, the Mishnah says that soft, at the end they'll become that. That's what he told them. Which of course is, brilliant answer. But if you think about it, really, what did he really mean to say? That faking it really becomes it? No, he meant to say that all of us have within us the piety. We're created in the divine image. Sometimes you may not see it. So sometimes, at least make believe. If you believe it, make believe. Let's say, you may not be charitable mood, but you know that it's good to be charitable. So be charitable even if you're not in the mood. And then ultimately you will actually also be in the mood. If you know it's the right thing, obviously. We're not talking about... So it's a type of behavioral, let's use a psychological term, behavioral mechanisms that allow you to access that type of inner good within you. Sometimes you love somebody and you don't feel it. But you love them once, or you know conceptually you love them, but you can't access it. Sometimes faking it. What do I mean by faking it? By acting that way. Buying them flowers or doing something loving, it awakens that feeling again. Obviously this needs to be balanced, not to do something completely superficially, or we're not talking about being deceptive or duplicitous. We're talking about a process that needs to be weighed case by case. But you get the idea. So the Torah is saying we have 7 fruit inside of us. They're there, waiting impatiently to be born, to come out and shine. And each of you has it. It's in a different way. I discussed in a generic form. But each of us have the chit, the seira, the wheat, the barley, the geffen, the grape, the fig, the pomegranate, the olive, and finally the date in a different fashion. One person's sweetness is not like another's, and one person's pressure is not like another's. So now the challenge upon us is to discover what it is and act on it. So try it out. Let's see what you look like at the end of tomorrow. If you really did like a Tu B'Shvat, 7 exercises in each of these 7. Maybe I'm getting the idea, maybe I should create, like I did with the Omer book, maybe some type of exercise like that. Some more ideas. But I'm not going to have that ready by tonight. So, but this can be a good catalyst. So, As I started off, now I see you're even more beautiful than when I saw you when you came in. And my eyesight is pretty good, so it's not about my eyes. So now the question is whether you can live up to it, whether we can live up to it. In the Zohar it says that the students of the Rashbi, the students of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, would say Shivchei Rashbi, they would compliment him. They would give him a lot of compliments. And the question is why? It's like a little weird. I mean, did he need it for his ego? He needed to hear praise and compliments, and we have to document it. So it says because the praise was actually, they were trying to reveal in him those qualities, and then when he heard it coming from them sincerely, he actually began an outpouring of Torah. So the more they praised him, the more Torah that he gave. Now obviously we're talking about a person that didn't do it for vanity purposes. But you see the same thing. You see Shivchei HaArizal, the praises of the Arizal, or Shivchei HaBaal Shem Tov. There's even a book called The Praises of the Baal Shem Tov. So initially when you look at it, you say, what is this? I mean, why would anyone need to just make a whole book about all the praises of the Baal Shem Tov? It seems almost like what's the word for it? Self-serving. I mean, it's not the Baal Shem Tov wrote it, but the students wrote it, you know. But there's something to be said that when you compliment someone in a healthy way, you actually elicit that within that person. Like I mentioned before with that fellow that I was dealing with who had was now, thank God, he's shining. He was going through rehab and all the challenges that he had. So it'd be good to find people that can compliment you for good reasons, see something in you that's beautiful. And it would be also nice that we do that to some people that we know. You never know. Pick up the phone, call somebody, and you'd be surprised and say, I'm just calling to tell you how beautiful you are. Say something specific, and what could you lose? You know. So that's Tu B'Shvat. So everyone have a very happy Tu B'Shvat. I want to announce that tomorrow night will not be a class. Philip sadly lost his younger brother who passed away this week. Tomorrow is the funeral. Richard, I think his name is. If anybody's interested in going to the funeral, if you let me know, I'll forward you the contact information, or Velvel can tell you as well. I think he knows. Yes, so our heart goes out. Condolences to Philip. And let's honor this class in honor of his brother, Yossel ben Naftali. Right, Yossel ben Naftali. The neshama should go where it has to go. Bless Philip and his family, and everyone should only have healthy, good, long lives. I'll also want to say in honor of my son's wife's grandmother passed away as well, his new wife in Pittsburgh, so I want to honor that as well. And any other dedications, Velvel, that I should mention? Well, I'm sure there are a lot of good news that I should be mentioning, but I don't know it all, so I included in all of this. Above all, everyone should have a very beautiful week, a wheat week, a barley one, a fruity one, a grapey week, a figgy one, pomegranate, and doesn't only mean the fact of pomegranate juice. And finally, olive and date, sweet olive oil and sweet week. And I look forward to see you all next week. And please, if you haven't, leave your email address here so we can stay in touch. I could send you the weekly articles I write. And in any way we could be of help to you, Meaningful Life Center, myself, we're always here in any possible way. And there are fruits that Velvel, thank you, prepared. Oh, yes? Okay. Thank you very much. Great. Chag Sameach. So please enjoy. And as I said, if I could be of any help, or anybody could like, please call on me. And I thought once in a while I also throw this out. This week I won't be. I'm going to be in London this weekend for a lecture, for a weekend lectures. So if any of you happen to be in London, come say hello. Or if you know any friends there, if you need information about that, just email us. And however, other weekends I am here, so I always extend invitations. If anybody wants to come, have a great Friday night dinner. I welcome you to my house. So just let me know if you're interested. I can schedule a week when I'm here. And what else? I'm just trying to be extra sweet on this Tisha B'Av, on this Tu B'Shvat. I'm trying to practice what I preach. So great night, everybody. Be well. Okay, thank you very much.